Welcome to our today's lecture. And I can see we are now at 33. I was still giving people time to log in. I don't understand why it takes so long for us to log in. Welcome to of us. We are trusting that the rest will join us soon. So I believe you can hear me. And in case you are not getting me well, kindly point it out in the public chat. So the other time we were talking about motivation and learning, and I know we didn't complete that section completely. We left at the stage where we were to look at the educational implications of motivation and learning. But if you remember the Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, we saw the physiological needs, the safety needs, the belonging and the love needs, the self-esteem needs, and the self-actualization. So we are asking as teachers, how can we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory to retain learners in class, to motivate learners? And in addition to school setting, even at organizational level, workers have to be motivated for them to be productive, for them to do their work well. And even you as a teacher, you also need to be motivated to be able to do your work well. So I will upload the notes on motivation, and you look at the educational implications. But just to talk about just generally, before we start on memory and learning, I want to say that when you look at the physiological needs, those are the needs for survival, the need for food, water, oxygen, pain avoidance, and all the others that are within that level of needs. We know very well that when students are hungry, when students are thirsty, when we don't provide good ventilation in our classes, the students cannot feel comfortable to learn. So as teachers, we're saying, we're not saying you give learners water, but should you be at management level, you organize for such like provisions if possible. And I think you are seeing nowadays, most of the schools have water tanks. Most of the schools have school feeding programs where children are given lunch. So those are some of the things schools can can meet the physiological needs of the learners by organizing school feeding programs, by providing water. We have seen most of the schools have water tanks, running water for those who can tap the rainwater. And we are going towards that because we see the need for us as a school setup to be able to provide such like survival needs for the learners, because if the learners are deprived of food, water, oxygen, and all those things we saw, then we saw that their minds will be preoccupied with how they can get the next meal, where they can get water, how they can breathe, get fresh air to breathe, and so on. But what about us as classroom teachers of tomorrow? As teachers, we are saying we may not be in a position to give learners food, water, and all those things, but we can assist the management with ideas. Number two, encourage the parents to pack something. Encourage the parents to pack something for the learners to take for lunch, in the case you are in a school where the feeding programs have not yet been established. And also, we also know as teachers, if we are not also well motivated, we cannot also teach well, because we'll be preoccupied with how to meet our physiological needs first before we can teach our learners. So again, we're saying teachers must also be paid well so that they can feed themselves, feed their loved ones, and they can also be able to house themselves well to feel secure, so that as you go to teach, your mind is not drawn back to the problems that you left at home, or maybe where you left your belongings, such that you know where you leave them, they are safe. So we are saying even as teachers, we also need to be motivated. So teachers must be paid well so that they can feed themselves, so that they can house themselves, they can clothe themselves, because you cannot go to class when you are dressed in a funny way, in torn clothes, because that will affect your self-esteem and you will not be able to deliver. So that is why in most cases you have seen teachers on strikes every other day, asking for more remuneration, increase in salaries, to be able to feed their loved ones, take their dear ones to school, feed themselves, clothe themselves well, and also be able to house themselves and feel secure. So those are some of the things about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we also look at organizational level, in whatever organization, Maslow's hierarchy of needs of motivation is very essential, and it is applied in every organization. Because if workers in an organization are not motivated in terms of remuneration, if you don't pay workers well, don't expect them to be productive. So you find that in most of the organizations, management take their workers out for team building events to go and socialize. You remember the need for belonging and the love, where you need other people, where you need to feel affiliated to a particular kind of groups, and so on. Others, you find that come maybe at the end of the year, they are given end of year party. Others are given things like what do we call them? They are given something in form of token to go and treat themselves and their loved ones well over the Christmas. Those are different ways organizations can motivate their workers. But all in all, even if workers must be paid well for them to be also productive in an organization. Why should we pay workers well? So that a worker can be able to feed themselves, feed their loved ones, house themselves well, and even shelter themselves, and also be able to dress well according to their status, so that their self-esteem is kept up in terms of their status. Because you cannot go saying you are a teacher and you are going to class in torn clothes, or you cannot say you are working in a particular organization like in the university where we are, and then you are going to work when you are dressed in torn clothes. That will affect your self-esteem because you don't even you feel demoralized. How are you going to present yourself in that office? So all these are important, and we are saying, as well, as much as we say we motivate our learners, we as teachers also must feel motivated by our employers or by our the people who are in charge of us, so that we also feel encouraged to go and work, and we also feel motivated. In terms of the need for belonging, love and belonging, affiliation, and uplifting of self-esteem to our learners. I remember when we were dealing with the social learning theory, we talked about nurturing. So we as teachers, we must be nurturing towards our learners. Let us encourage them, appreciate their good performance. Let us, even those who are not performing well, let us encourage them and reach out to them to see, in terms of Piaget's theory of cognitive development, where they are. We identify the level of ability where they are performing, and lift them from there with that kind of caring attitude as teachers. In terms of security, learners must feel secure even in the classroom and in the school compounds. And therefore, we are saying the classroom must be free from anything that may be a threat to the learners. If you are a teacher who threatens learners, they will not feel motivated to come to your class. So teachers who are threatening to learners, teachers who handle learners with the threats of caning learners without caring, they are not supposed to be in that class in the first place, because they are threats to the learner's security. Encourage also learners to love their fellow learners as much as possible. Try to avoid peer bullying, especially like the Form 1s when they go to their new schools, secondary schools. You know what happens. So that one should be discouraged at every level of learning. And all new students, even old students, sometimes can bully one another. So in that case, the student who is bullied will not want to come to school. So those are some of the things we should avoid, and ensure that even in the school compounds, there are no things that can harm our learners. And that is why you find these days in most of the schools, they have gates and a security guard, because that one also ensures learners, as they enter into that compound, their security is assured. So those are some of the things, and therefore, as teachers, encourage learners to be able to exploit their full potential, provide opportunities for them to work on their own, so that they can exploit their full potential. And at the same time, you are now helping them to self-actualize and so on. So those are some of the educational implications of my Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, and also in terms of motivation and learning as a whole. So I'll upload the notes, and you'll be able to read them and even get more than what I have given you now. So let us move on to today's topic about memory and learning. has happened. Sorry, I got. What is happening? Can you hear? I'm getting a lot of echo. Of the day. Which is now memory and learning. So this topic is very, very important because without memory, we cannot measure learning. Without memory, we cannot be able to even know who we are. We cannot connect our past experiences to the present, and will not be able to remember anything. So it is memory which tells us that what we are doing, we are aware of what is happening around us. And therefore, memory and learning is very important because we cannot even test our learners without understanding what goes on in the thinking of the learner. Because whenever we want to get or find out where the learning has taken place, we will need to measure the memory of the learner and to see how much of the content that we gave them they are able to show us they have attained in terms of what we have given them. And therefore, memory and learning is very, very important because it is memory which enables us to measure progress of learning. It enables us to remember even who we are. We think and reason using remembered facts, which must be in the memory. And therefore, memory is very, very important. And we need to understand, because without it, then we will not know who we are. And the learning may not take place because we will not be able to remember what to be tested and measure learning. So, so by definition, what is memory? We want to know what it is and what everybody, this is a name we know, this is a word we know the meaning, but we need to be able to state it in the same understanding and in the same way as everybody else, because if we somebody asks you what is memory, you know memory has something to do with the brain. We know memory has something to do with thinking. We know memory has something to do with remembering. We know something as memory has something to do with what goes on in our heads, but maybe we can express it in different ways, and that is quite okay. But in terms of this unit, we define memory as the faculty of the brain by which data or information is encoded, stored, and retrieved when needed. Remember, we have just said earlier on that it is through the memory that we are able to remember even our own names. It is through the memory that we are able to remember what happened yesterday or even some years ago, and we can still be able to state what happened years ago as fresh as if it has happened just now. So it is that faculty of the brain by which data or information is encoded. Encoded means registered. Once it is registered there, it is stored. Once it is stored there, then when you need it, you can recall it back, and then you can start saying what happened yesterday, what happened years ago, or what happened some minutes ago, and so on. So it is that part of the brain that enables us to recall, to store information, to register information, store it, and retrieve it when we need it. The process of retrieving is like when you are talking about when you now want to explain what you saw or to explain what you know about something, that is the process of retrieving. So memory is about the retention of information over time for the purposes of influencing future action. In other words, you can store information and use it later on to do other things informed by that information that you had stored. So generally, we say memory is the processes that are used to acquire, store, retain, and later retrieve information. So the last point in this slide is just telling us what we have said in the point number 1 in the slide, that it is all the processes that involve encoding. This is what we are calling acquiring. When encoding is something has come in, it registers in the memory, and therefore it is stored there. It is retained there, and later on, when you want to use that same information, you can get it back and use it either to answer questions or to do something or to tell somebody about something you know, which is in you or in your memory. So that is the meaning of memory generally, and as we talk about it in this unit. Anytime we are talking about memory in this unit and in this topic, we'll be thinking about how we encode or register information, how we store it in that faculty of the brain, and how we retrieve it when we need it or when we are supposed to use it. So it involves all those processes, just like point 3 says, it involves all those processes whereby how does this information, how do we store it, we leave it there, and later on we can use it, store the information. It's just like when you store something in a computer, because you must input it. The inputting is what we are calling the encoding. And then once you save it there, it is stored there. And when you want to use the same information like these notes, when you want to use them, you'll always be clicking your soft copy and then reading what is there, you'll be retrieving. So memory operates like we operate our computers generally. So we have 3 stages of memory, just like we have said. You remember by definition, we have said it is that faculty of the brain where information is encoded. That is the first stage. Information is also stored. That is now the second bit of it, and retrieved. So when we talk of the 3 stages of the memory, it is about where the information is acquired, how it comes in, it is acquired, stored, and then later on it can be retrieved. So when we talk of the 3 stages of the memory, we are looking at the different stages of that memory where information comes in, it is registered, or encoded, and then once it is encoded, it is stored, and later on we can retrieve it. So this will do about the 3 levels of the memory where all these processes take place. So with that understanding, let me go through the slide. We are saying there are 3 major processes involved in memory. We have the encoding, storage, and the retrieval, exactly as we have said in the definition of the memory. And therefore, in order to form new memories, information must be changed into usable form, which occurs through the process known as encoding. So so this encoding is like when you input information in a computer, then the computer must do something to make sure that it is registered in the computer. That is the encoding. So once this information has been successfully encoded, it must be stored in memory for later use. Just like once you put some information in a computer, if you don't save it and the power goes, then you will not be able to retrieve it. So this is why we are saying once this information has been successfully encoded, it is then stored for later use. Just like you must save what you put in the computer so that when you open that computer later, you can get it. So this is the same thing that goes on in the memory. So much of this stored information lies outside our awareness most of the time, except when we actually need to use it. This is what we are saying here is that we know so many things which are inside our memory, but it is not our problem to know what we know, but immediately something appears that requires you to use some of the information that is in your memory, it becomes alive again, you become aware of it. But most of the things that are stored in our memories, we normally not always alert that we have it. But when a moment comes that requires us to use some of the information that is stored in our memories, straight away it becomes alive and we become aware of it now that we need it. And therefore, the retrieval process allows us to bring stored memories into conscious awareness. So what we are saying, it is outside our awareness, is that we are not conscious that we have that information. Until that time, when we need to use the information, that is when it becomes alive again in our conscious, and therefore we can retrieve it. So the 3 stages of the memory are the ones which involve the way we receive that message from the environment as a stimulus. It is then registered, that is encoded, and then it is processed and stored, and finally we can retrieve it. So the first part of this memory is what we call the sensory memory. The sensory memory, this is the memory at the level of our senses. In other words, the sensory memory is where we are immediately aware of what is happening right now. That is why we are saying it is at the level of our senses. Right now, we can know what is happening. Right now, what is happening, we are sensing it, and that is the sensory memory. It is at the level of our senses. So our sensory organs are capable of retaining what goes on them, that impinges on them, but only for a very short time. In fact, we say it is for only half a second. Only half a second, And then the sensory memory, the information either disintegrates or it is registered. So whatever is registered within that fraction of a second, then it is the one which moves on to be processed and stored. So immediately after we experience something, our sensory system contains, for a very brief moment, an image of the incoming information. So even after the stimulus has disappeared. So within that fraction of a second, it's just like the way I'm talking now. Immediately I stop talking, somehow you'll be kind of aware of what I was saying, or you'll be aware that you were hearing me saying something. So that is what we are saying. Even after the stimulus has disappeared, the sensory system will contain that brief moment of the image of what was happening. And that is why we are saying the sensory memory is at the level of our senses. In other words, what is happening as at the moment. So the information in the sensory memory is temporary, and it lasts for about half a second, just as I had said. It is very temporary. It doesn't last there. So whatever registers in the sensory memory for that half a second, it is the one which moves to the next stage, and the rest disappears completely. So it involves a continued excitement of the sense organ itself. In other words, for the information to keep on being sensed in the sensory memory, it has to keep on being repeated so many times so that it is still there. It is still there. It is within the senses at that moment. Any information that is registered in the sensory memory is available to be selected for attention and for processing into a more permanent type of memory, which is not called the short-term memory, which is abbreviated as capital S, capital T, capital M, or long-term memory, which is abbreviated as capital L, capital T, capital M. So anytime you see these short forms, STM, it means short-term memory, and the LTM means long-term memory. So this is what we are saying about the sensory memory. Whatever is registered within that half a second, it is the one which moves on, and the rest does not stay alive at all. The rest disappears. So that which registered or is encoded within that short moment, once it moves to the short-term memory, it is encoded there and pushed further into the long-term memory for storage. At the short-term memory level, some information can also disappear in the form of forgetting, because the short-term memory operates for also a very short moment. Possibly, most of the books talk about 20 seconds. So in the short-term memory, whatever does not register in 20 seconds, unless it is repeated again and again and again, whatever does not register there is forgotten. And what registers in the short-term memory, after it has passed within this half a second from the sensory memory, it comes to the short-term memory. Sometimes not all of it that comes here is registered. Some of it is forgotten, and therefore it disappears. And whatever is registered here is the one which is moved into long-term memory. At the long-term memory, information does not disappear at all. Whatever goes there is stored for use any other time it is required. In the sensory memory, some information can get lost so long as it's not registered, and therefore whatever even comes to the short-term memory, some of it can also disappear in form of forgetting, and therefore if you repeat it several times, then it will register, and therefore it will be moved from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. But whatever comes in the long-term memory, it cannot be lost. So in the long-term memory, there's nothing like forgetting. But in the short-term memory, some information can disappear in the form of forgetting. Others in the sensory memory, it is very temporarily. So if it is not registered within the half a second, it disappears completely. So we are talking of a figure 26 here, which shows how information is processed for purposes of retention. And any information encountered in the environment enters the sensory register. It is called the sensory register. It is what we call the sensory memory because it is believed that the information is stored as it is received without any major changes in its form. So it is like when you freshly enter information in a computer, it goes in the way you have entered it. But then the computer processes it when you want to store it. The computer will treat it in a way that it arranges it in a particular form and then stores it. So most of the sensory stimuli which enter the sensory register are not processed, and only those which are processed proceed to the next chamber, which is the short-term memory. So this is the diagram we are talking about. That shows how information is processed. So we have the environment. In your notes, the diagram will be clear, but this one I was trying to draw it here. It didn't come out well, but I'll talk about it as it is. But whatever will come into your notes will be a very clear diagram. So here we are saying we have the environment. Anything that we hear, anything that we have to goes into our memory for encoding and storing comes from the surrounding. Either people are talking, it is something you are seeing, or it is something happening around you. So this is the stimuli, we call it the environment stimuli, which brings in the input information. And then once information is now being received in the memory, the first place that it comes is the sensory memory or the sensory register here. This is the place we say the information stays for almost half a second. Whatever does not last, whatever is not registered in this memory within half a second is discarded. It's thrown out. It is discarded, doesn't move on. So it is only that information which registers here, which is moved on to what we are calling the short-term memory. So any other information that does not register here within half a second, it is discarded and forgotten. It just goes away. It is thrown out. And that is why we are saying, like when you are studying, you must rehearse, repeat and repeat and repeat so many times so that the same thing registers here, moves on to short-term memory. It is processed again. So I said my diagram is not very good, but I will explain it. So this forgotten information is supposed to be forgotten at this level of the short-term memory. So this information in this diagram here, or this square here, and this arrow, okay? So this one is under here. This square here is under the sensory memory or the sensory register, where whatever does not register is discarded. But then whatever moves on to the short-term memory, some of it is forgotten. This one should be under here. Some of it is forgotten. And whatever registers here, it is now processed like you would now, you want now to save information in a computer. You click save. You know, we don't know what goes on in the computer so that it now saves it. So this is exactly what happens here. Some of the information that has passed from the sensory memory is the one which comes to short-term memory. Within the information lasts here for about 20 seconds, and then it is now processed and stored. So once it is stored here for a very short moment, it will be then passed on. There is another arrow here. I think that diagram just disappeared, that section of the diagram. So there is another arrow here which also moves in this direction, and then there should be another square here. There should be another square here where now it is written long-term memory. So any information that comes from short-term memory and enters the long-term memory, it is stored there permanently. It is never lost. And there is no forgetting in the long-term memory. But in the short-term memory, some information can be forgotten. And once it is forgotten, is not registered, it disappears now for good. But when you keep on saying the same thing, registered here, it comes here, even what is forgotten can be recovered here and then pushed onto the long-term memory, which should be another square here. So in the long-term memory, there is no forgetting, there is no discarding of information. Information is stored here permanently. So when we say we are forgetting something, yet we knew it, so long as it had been registered in the long-term memory, there is nothing like forgetting in the long-term memory. What happens is that, the way that information is stored may not be reached where it is when you need it. And that is why even after a long time, the information you were looking for from you thought you had it, and when you look for it, you don't get it. When you want to retrieve it, it's not coming out. Then people start saying, it's like, I have forgotten that one. So long as it is in the long-term memory, it is never forgotten. It's only that it becomes too difficult to retrieve it from where it is. Because that is why sometime in the future, you end up remembering it, and it now becomes live in you. What you were saying you have forgotten. So people say, oh, I have remembered. So it's not even remembering because you had not forgotten, because in the long-term memory, there is no forgetting. The only thing there is that it was difficult to trace the information by that time, depending on where it was stored. So you remember when we were dealing the Piaget cognitive development, we talked of how information is stored in the memory in terms of schemas. So the schemas keep on reorganizing themselves to accommodate new information. You remember we talked about assimilation and accommodation, where new information comes in, the schemas rearrange themselves to receive the new information, and they reorganize that information depending on where that information must be stored in the schemas. They reorganize themselves, and therefore, in the long-term memory, the schemas are normally in the long-term memory, so there is nothing like forgetting. It's only that where that information is stored, it is not easy to retrieve it, but with the time, it will be traced. Let me put it as an example, because it will still feature in the next slides, so that I don't talk about it again and again. An example here is like, look at the way you use your computers. Look at the way you use your computers. Sometimes you have some documents in Word. You have the Word documents. So the Word documents, those which carry the same information that are addressing similar issues, you save them together as different Word documents, and then you put them in one folder, and that folder you name it, such that when you want to get that information, you know when you open that folder, it carries information that relates to a certain piece of information. And when you open that folder, it has in it several documents where one of them should give you what you want. That is how the schemas and that is how the brain operates also. So sometimes what is happening, what we do in our computer is exactly what happens in our memory. So sometimes, like if I use myself as an example, all the test papers that I have sent of EPS 201, there is EPS 201. I name them in terms of year and the semester. If I set another exam, EPS 201, in another semester, I will name it in terms of EPS 201 this year, this semester. Even in the years to come, all those test papers will be stored in a folder which is named EPS 201 exams. All the exams that I have set in the years that have passed, the ones that I have set for you because it is already set, the ones that will set in future for this other second years who will come after you, they will all be stored in one folder, but in different Word documents. So whenever I want to access any paper of EPS 201, I will just go to that folder. And if I want the paper that was done in the year 2018, I'll be able to get that paper, because within that it has all the test papers that I have sent for EPS 201. So once I open that folder, I'll be able to get any of those papers. I believe you are getting me. So that is how the long-term memory operates. Sometimes you can even put a folder inside another folder. So that is what happens sometimes when you say you think you are forgetting, or you are not getting what you wanted to retrieve from your memory, and then you say you are forgetting. Sometimes what happens is that you have, just like in a computer, you can put a lot of information. You can put a folder inside another folder which contains other piece of documents, and in that folder, the two folders are also put in another folder. So that is what happens in the long-term memory. So information that is in the inside folder, which is inside another folder and another folder, it is not easy to retrieve it immediately when you need it, but the memory, the long-term memory, knows you needed that information, and when you think you have forgotten, it is still working behind the curtains, let me say so. It is still working so that it is still looking for that which you wanted, and later on, after maybe even a year or even a few days, you remember what you are looking for. So the memory has been looking for that, and once it comes, it is retrieved. It is now comes back to our consciousness, and you say, oh, I remember what I was looking for is this and this and that. The memory is still busy working, looking for that which you wanted, and immediately it gets it. That is when you say you remember now. I believe we are getting it. So that is how the long-term memory operates. There is nothing like forgotten information in the long-term memory. The only thing that happens when we say we think we are forgetting is that it takes a longer time for that information which you wanted to be traced where it is, depending on where it was stored in the memory, in the long-term memory. So I believe we understand now, and now we can just move on and read it through, because all that is the operation of encoding, receiving the information in the sensory memory, then how it moves to the short-term memory, and finally it is now goes to the long-term memory for permanent storage. What we need to know is here, by now we should be able to say the difference between the short-term memory, the sensory memory, and the long-term memory. We have seen that for one, information in the sensory memory is temporary. Okay? And then we are saying in the in the short-term memory, information lasts longer than it lasts in the sensory memory. Number two, a lot of information can be discarded in the sensory memory, but what happens in the short-term memory, forgetting takes place there, and in the long-term memory, there is no forgetting. In the short-term memory, information is stored for a short time, but in the long-term memory, information there is permanent, permanently stored. This is what I have talked about, but let me read through. Information received from the sensory register in its raw form is processed in short-term memory, in which it is retained for a short while. Short-term memory is also what we call the active memory, and the information there is what we are currently aware of or what we are conscious or thinking about. And this is what the Freudian psychologists call or refer to as our conscious mind. The short-term memory is also what we call our conscious mind or active memory. It is what we are experiencing at the moment. So we are saying the short-term memory consists of what is in our immediate awareness at any given time. Short-term memory is also called a working memory, in the sense that it consists of what we have in mind at the present time, and the information that enters the short-term memory is either processed for further storage in a more permanent way or is ignored. Ignored means forgotten. So it's either processed for further storage in a more permanent way. This more permanent way is when the information is pushed to the long-term memory. So again, what we are saying here is that it's just what I explained. So when we say new materials are evaluated, organized, and combined with the new information, and the previous one taken from storage places, is the way I explained when we talked about the schemas, when I used our own computer, our information stored there. But we are saying that the short-term memory has very limited capacity. In fact, we say it can only at any one particular moment handle 7 separate items. This point here is very important. I want you to get note of it. Unless the new information is very vivid, that is clear and simple, we need a rehearsal to keep it in the short-term memory. So that is why we say, even when you are preparing for your examinations, or even when you have a test like we had last week, you have to read and reread. You have to keep on revising, rehearsing, repeating the same thing, so that it is kept alive. Because we have said short-term memory, it is what we are experiencing at the moment. So once you repeat it so many times, the more you repeat it, the more it keeps on registering in the short-term memory. And as you repeat it, the more it will be pushed to the long-term memory, because the same thing keeps on coming, and therefore it is pushed now to the long-term memory. In rehearsal, the information is practiced in one way or another. The aim of rehearsing is to keep the material available until it can be used or until it can be stored in some integrated fashion. That is when it is pushed to the long-term memory. So this is the long-term memory. And we are saying that the long-term memory refers to the continuing storage of information. The Freudian psychologists, I think you did Freudian in Introduction to Psychology. They call the long-term memory preconscious and unconscious minds. Remember when we started, we said most of the information that we have stored in our memories, it is not, we are not aware of it until that time when we need it. And when we need it, we can recall it. Immediately it becomes life. It is outside our awareness. The information in the long-term memory is outside our awareness, but can be called into working memory. Remember we said the working memory is the short-term memory. You see, the process of retrieving is moving backwards. The process of retrieving is moving backwards. So when we want to use the information, now it moves from the long-term memory to the short-term memory, which is now the working memory. It is the memory that we are aware of what is happening. And then once it comes here, we now have the information and we can now use it. So the process of retrieval is coming backwards from long-term memory to short-term memory, which is our working memory. So we were here when I said information that is largely outside, it is information that is largely outside our awareness, the information that is in the long-term memory. Until that time when we need it, it is retrieved and is brought to the working memory, which is the short-term memory. So we are saying some of the information in long-term memory, some can be easily recalled, while other memories are much more difficult to access. And I explained why some are difficult to access, depending on how they have been stored in the schemas in the memory. Remember we said the short-term memory has a limited capacity. At any one particular moment, it can handle 7 different items, but we are saying the long-term memory has an unlimited capacity and an unlimited duration. And that is why we are saying information, once it goes to long-term memory, we can never say that it is forgotten. It only becomes difficult to retrieve it, but later it will come back into life when it is retrieved. You see here we are saying information in the long-term memory can be stored for as long as we live, because it has an unlimited duration, and there is no time we shall say our brains, our long-term memories is full. It has an unlimited capacity. And it is the final storage of information. That is another difference. So these are the things I talked about what encoding is. The information needs to be organized so that it can be easily available for future reference and it can be updated by new information. I explained that when I was using the example of what goes on in a computer, the way you store in the form of documents and you put them in one folder, and you can put that folder in another folder and so on. So during the transfer of information from short-term memory to long-term memory, incoming information is tagged or encoded to be filed in the appropriate place. In other words, it's like when you have several Word documents and you now want to put them in a specific folder. If it is not properly encoded and stored in the long-term memory, it may not be accessible later. So it is there, but to access it later, it might take long. Some of the work of the memory organization and filing apparently occurs during sleep, in which our recent additions to long-term memory are reviewed, improved, and systematically encoded or tagged. So we are saying, this is what we are saying here. You see, in the day, so much is stored in our long-term memory. All the experiences of the day that go through short-term memory to long-term memory, it is so much, so they are just kept there. But when you are asleep, because the long-term memory is not being disturbed now by receiving new information, when you are asleep, it is when now the organization takes place of filing, just like when you would pick a file, which has several folders. You want to put that file folder in another folder, which has other folders containing other documents. So this is what we are saying is happening. So this is the reorganization of how related information is now transferred to the relevant storage places in our memory. So here we are saying sleep and rest may also enhance our ability to recall what we have learned, because there is less interference from addition from new information. Even you as students, and with the experience that you have, you can advise somebody in secondary school on how to study, because you know how you used to study and how you used to be able to recall learned information to enable you do your tests better and successfully. At your experience, you can advise somebody in primary school, you can advise somebody in secondary school on how to study. So here we are saying, even when you are asleep, and remember we say, a succeeding student does not sleep. A succeeding student, even when walking, your mind is still awake. Even when you are eating, you are not just thinking of the food. Even when you are eating, you can try to remember some things that you studied in the morning when you are even taking your lunch. So we are saying here, sleep and rest enhance our ability to recall what we have learned, because there is less interference from addition from new information. So this is the time, and I believe as succeeding students, you are able to do this, and maybe that is why you managed to be in a university like you are today. A succeeding student, when you go and sleep, you must always flash back and take a video of what you learned during the day. And this is what makes you to wake up at about 3 in the morning, because immediately you realize that there's something you learned the previous day and you can't remember it well. That gives you a reason to wake up very early and read it, so that it is still alive in your working memory. It is still alive in your short-term memory, so that it can now be transferred again to the long-term memory for storage, so that you can retrieve it. Sometimes even when you are working with the friends, your mind can still be ringing something to make sure that you're asking yourself something. Can I remember what the teacher said during this particular lecture? If it is something you realize, even as you are talking with your friends, you can't remember what the teacher said about a particular area of study, then that gives you a reason to plan to do your preps, or to plan not to sleep until you understand, until you revise it and get to know what it is. That is why we say a succeeding student is always learning. Even when you are not holding books, you are always having a video played back of what you have done to know what you need to do, to read what you think you are not very sure of. And that is how you succeed. That is how we get first class honors. They don't come by the way of hook and fluke. You may have noticed that when you revise for an examination and have a good rest or sleep, you are able to recall better than when you revise throughout the night or up to the last minute. I don't know your position about this point. There are some people who read up to the last minute, they enter the examination room, and you find that you cannot even remember the last thing you read before you entered that examination room. So we say sometimes, what we say here is that keep revising early enough so that you don't read the last minutes. So that even if you have a test, you are given a test, you are woken up and given a test on a specific area that you have covered, you have been revising, you have been rehearsing, and you know when that information, because of the rehearsing, it is always taken back to your long-term memory. It keeps on coming to the short-term memory, taken to the long-term memory, and therefore it is still alive in your long-term memory, and immediately you need it, you can retrieve it. That is why we say start revising. Preparing for an examination is a process. You don't wait to read the day or the evening of the test or the examination. You read and keep reading so that you are always ready, and what you are doing, you are only enriching what you already know. You keep on revising, and even when you are asleep, you can always flash back and ask yourself what you know. You're trying to organize the long-term memory, and at that time you are trying to see what you are very sure of, what you don't seem to be sure of, so that the next day you have a reason to spare an hour or so and read through an area you realized you cannot recall that information very well, so that it registers well in your long-term memory. So here we are saying organization of information in the long-term memory. Material seems to be filed in categories and subcategories. You remember when I gave you the example of Word documents stored in folders, and also folders stored in other big folders. These are the categories and the subcategories. It's a network with several pathways to reach a piece of information. This is because the organized material is easily remembered. So the example I gave about putting folders inside other folders, it is what we are calling here clustering. Clustering is used to organize related information into groups in the memory. Information that is categorized becomes easier to remember and recall. So this is everything that I talked about here in terms of the example I gave using the computer. Here we are saying an attempt to remember a piece of information may trigger memory of related information because related material appear to be found together. This is according to Huffman and others in 1995. So this is a very, very important area, and I want us to all be alert when we are here. This is not something we can overlook. look at this diagram together and let us pay a lot of attention to it. We're calling it memory retrieval. And here we are looking at what we call the curve of forgetting. Sometimes we call it the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve looks like this. You have learned like the way I'm teaching you now. So at this moment, you have 100% of what I am saying. But then with the time, how much will you be able to remember? So we are looking at sorry for that. We are still together. We are still together. So we are looking at, you have learned a certain material like we have done now. Then we have day 1. We are looking at this, the curve itself is the one in black, is this curve. I want us to pay a lot of attention here. We need to be able to talk about it at any other time in the future. By the time you came to this lecture, you had zero knowledge about what we have learned. And therefore, as we started discussing, you gained a lot. By the time we will be closing the lecture, you'll be at 100% of the information that you have. That is day 1. So at day 1, you are here. You almost have everything that we have talked about. So look at day 2. If you don't revise after we have finished the lecture, if you don't revise the same material, the curve, the content that you have, you see as you go out of the class, you'll be at 100%. But then day 2, if you have not revised anything, what is happening is that the content or the material that you have comes down. You see the percentage has dropped from 100. So we say it drops from 100 to between 50 and 80 of what you learned. It drops. So if you don't read it through again, you keep on forgetting. You keep on forgetting. So day 2, then you like we have here in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 2 to 4 minutes, all those. So here I want to talk about it in terms of the days here that you keep on forgetting. Day 2, you can see at day 2, you can remember very little. Then all the days up to day 7, if you don't go back and read the same material again, can you see the level where your content of remembering will be? You'll have very low content at day 7. In fact, we say if you don't repeat the same material, if you don't keep on revisiting, rehearsing, practicing the same material, as day goes by, if you don't read after the first day, it drops down to about 50 to 80. Then come to maybe day 3, it keeps on dropping down. You can't remember anything. When you are at day 7, you still can remember something. But if you give yourself, like for instance, a month or so, by the 30 days, you'll be able to remember almost nothing. So this is what we call the forgetting curve, or the curve of forgetting. So we are saying, after you have done the lesson, if you take 10 minutes to revise the contents, your level of remembrance will be very high. You'll be here. So it will go down, and if you take some 5 minutes again and revise the content again, you still can remember this. So your content is still remembered at very high level here. So if you give yourself time to keep on reading and rereading, every time as days go by, take a few minutes, read the same content, it will stay alive in your active memory, as it will keep on being alive in your active memory or working memory, which is the short-term memory, and immediately it will keep on being transferred to the long-term memory, and therefore the level of remembrance will be very high, so long as you don't get out of touch of the material. So anytime you keeping in touch with the material that you have learned, the curve will keep on staying at a very high level. But what happens is that if you don't read, you have the first day, second day, by the time you finish that, to 3%. This is day 10, you still have something. But give yourself 30 days, because like I know we have over 30 days after we have learned this, by the time you'll be able to do the test. If you don't remember it, if you don't keep on reading through what we have learned from the time we started, this is how the curve goes for any unit that you are studying and you don't revisit it. This is how the curve goes, such that by the time we say the examinations are near, you almost remember nothing, and therefore it's like you are starting afresh. And starting afresh makes learning lose meaning, because why did you even have to be in that class if you cannot keep in touch with the content that you did in the class? So this is what we are saying. If you don't revisit the content learned, this is how the curve goes. But if you, after a break in day 2, you take 10 minutes, read through the contents. Every other time, give yourself some more time, read through the content. The curve will remain high. You'll be seeming to forget, but immediately you are forgetting, or material is getting out of you, then you remind yourself, the curve comes high again. So we say this is how you maintain, the level of remembrance of reading, by keeping on rehearsing. Remember, we said rehearsing is very important, because we keep the information alive in the working memory, so that it is always taken to the long-term memory. And when we need it, it will be very easy to retrieve, because it will be very current in the long-term memory. So this is the curve of forgetting. Sometimes we just call it the forgetting curve. So when you be reading these notes in your own free time, I request that you even go to the internet and Google about the curve of forgetting, or the forgetting curve. And I want you to come up, you will be able to get the person who came about, the psychologist who brought about the curve of forgetting. If it is not in your notes, you'll be able to get the person. and you read it and you'll be able to understand more and explain it in a better way. Because remember we said when we were doing the constructivism theory of learning, students remember more of the things they learn on their own than even what we teach them. Because once you learn in your own, you enrich what we have already given you. So I want you to read more about this forgetting curve and get to understand it and be able to talk about it in a very clear way, explain it well. This is very important for us as teachers because we need to use it to be able to encourage our learners to stay alive, to keep revising, and I am sure, although you didn't know what you were doing when you were studying to pass your KCSE, I am sure you kept revisiting the learned content so that you don't forget. And there is nothing like, yeah, you forget if you don't read. We are soon going to see the theories of forgetting. The retrieval process, I explained about it. So you are going to read it again in your notes. Let me not repeat it again. I explained about it when we were talking about that diagram there, how retrieval takes place. So we have what we call theories of forgetting. The theories of forgetting. How do we forget? That is the thing. How do we forget? So remember, we have looked at that curve, which we called it the curve of forgetting. But how do we explain how we forget? How do we explain how we forget? I don't know why we are signing out. It is still early. It is only 9. So let us look at the theories of forgetting in a brief way so that we don't come back to the same thing when we meet next. Because time is also moving and we are soon going to be doing our examinations. Let us look at how we forget to understand how we forget. But what is this forgetting? It is the inability to recall, recognize, or relearn at an improved rate. That is how we define forgetting. Inability to recall learned content, recognize, or relearn at an improved rate. Forgetting may be due to storage failure. We understand what goes on in the memory now, in which the memory trace was never satisfactorily created or consolidated initially. Forgetting may also be as a result of retrieval failure. Remember we said in the long-term memory, we don't forget, but we might fail to retrieve the information where it is, in which the memory trace is present, but an adequate cue for evoking it is lacking. The adequate cue for evoking it is lacking. In other words, the memory is not able to get the lead that takes it to the memory where that information was stored. And that is why, like for instance, in a computer, when you look for something and you can't get it, you search it. You write what you are looking for and the search, so that the computer goes into its memories and retrieves that. Several theories have been formulated to explain how forgetting occurs. And one of these theories is the decay theory. One of these theories is the decay theory. One of these theories is the decay theory. And what does this decay theory say? Let us make sure that we understand these theories of forgetting. The first one we are looking at is the decay theory. And this theory assumes that memory disappears or deteriorates with the passage of time. When we say something is decaying, it has stayed for a very long time. So when you want to remember the decay theory, is that we are saying memory seems to disappear with the passage of time. That is what the theory says. There appears to be decay or fading of memory traces of information due to the continuous metabolic processes of the brain. The traces of the information that were learned slowly disintegrate and they become extinct as time lapses. So we are saying that because of the metabolic processes, you see the brain keeps on wearing out. We have the dead cells that wear out in the brain. And if that information was stored in those cells which fade out or decay in the brain, and they are excreted due to metabolic processes, then if that information was there, it is likely to disappear with the disappearance of the brain that was containing it after a very long time. Remember, brain keeps on renewing its cells. So because we have limited capacity for processing information, rehearsal can prevent decay. So this is what I remember I said that the more you keep on repeating this a given particular kind of information, then the more you rehearse it, it becomes alive again in your memory, so that if it had started to decay or disintegrate or get extinct, it is created afresh. And therefore, we are saying rehearsing can prevent loss of information due to time passage. However, as you may agree with this theory, it doesn't explain why sometimes we are able to remember things we learned long time ago. It may not explain why, but we have just said that the inability to recall a certain information is as a result of difficulties in retrieval, but if it is retrieved, it will still come back to life. The next theory of forgetting is consolidation theory. So I want you to be very clear with the theory. The decay theory is about disappearance of information in the memory due to passage of time as a result of the memory wearing out due to metabolic processes. I hope we can remember that. The consolidation theory assumes that memory trace needs an undisturbed period of time for it to be firmly fixed. So certain conditions occurring soon after an experience can eradicate the memory before it becomes permanent. This one is very key here. We need to understand why sometimes information does not stick in the brain in the long-term memory. Let me not talk of brain now. We are specifically dealing with the memory. So sometimes if information is disturbed before it is correctly put where it should be put, the memory can be eradicated. Sometimes physical and emotional shock can cause forgetting of recent events, possibly due to the disruption of normal neural functioning. Let's look at this example. It explains well about the consolidation theory. Remember, consolidation theory is loss of information because before it could be well filed in our memory, something happened that disturbed its fixing in the memory. Look at this example here. It tries to explain well. People who suffer brain injury may not remember what happened before an accident, even though their memory of the distant past is normal. Why is this so? This is because the accident disrupts immediate memories before they have a chance to be consolidated and saved in the proper place in our memory. So this theory, the consolidation theory, proposes that forgetting occurs as a result of what happens between point A, when the information is learned, and the point B, when the person is required to recall what he or she learned a while ago. So then, why do we forget? We forget something because other information blocks its retrieval, and this type of forgetting is what we commonly, what is common with similar materials. We forget something because other information blocks its retrieval. So that is why we are talking about, I don't know whether you have had people who have had accidents, and all what they can remember is they just had a certain bang, a big sound somewhere, and they cannot remember next what happens. Sorry for that. So people just hear, they cannot remember what else took place, but they remember hearing something. So they cannot even connect where they were coming from. They cannot remember what happened, but all that interrupted whatever was happening by the time the accident occurred. What they only remember is the sound they heard and nothing more that happened after that. This is what we are saying, that have we moved to another? So that is why we are saying we forget something because other information blocks its retrieval. And this type of forgetting is common with the similar materials. But I want us to go back to consolidation, where we are saying before some, you see, when the accident, like when the accident occurs, what was happening, like how the car was coming, what the driver was doing before the accident occurred, had not been registered properly in the brain. And immediately now what happened is that sound which they had. So they cannot really remember what happened before they had the ban. This is because that information was there, but it had not been correctly saved in the long-term memory and placed in the proper place for later retrieval. So that interference, what has happened? So that interference is the one which causes the blockage. So this theory proposes that we have already done that. So there are two types of this type of kind of interference, which can interfere with the information and we say for forgetting. So we have what we call retroactive inhibition and the proactive inhibition. These are some of the ways this theory explains how we forget. What is this retroactive inhibition? In other words, to inhibit means to kind of interfere or block. Proactive inhibition involves forgetting something because information learned previously or earlier interferes with it. That is what we call proactive inhibition. Forgetting something because the information learned previously or earlier interferes with it. And that is why we are saying what had happened, like when the accident occurred, the people, somebody cannot remember what they had seen earlier because they can only now remember the bank they had when maybe there was a collision and so on. Proactive interference is when an old memory makes it more difficult or impossible to remember a new memory. A good example here is when a child goes to school and they start to learn a second language, say Kiswahili, the child will have difficulties in remembering the mother tongue. I believe you can relate to that. The retroactive inhibition involves forgetting something because information learned afterward interferes with it. So that is a good example, like where we are talking about that child. When they go to school where they are not using the language they were using before they went to school, they tend to forget the mother tongue language, and they now can only remember the language they are using currently. Retroactive interference occurs when new information interferes with our ability to remember previously learned information. And a good example here is like the pronunciation of words in a second language is sometimes heavily interfered with learning of a first language. You remember we talked about mother tongue interference? We have what we call motivated forgetting theory. What does this theory say? This theory assumes that we wish to forget something unpleasant, or something that would cause pain, anxiety, and embarrassment. It is motivated in that, we call it motivated forgetting theory, in that you are forcing it. It is you who wants to forget it. So it is motivated in a way. So you want to forget something that is unpleasant, or something that is embarrassing, or something that causes pain or anxiety when you remember it. Sometimes we may actively work to forget memories, especially those of traumatic or disturbing events or experiences. We have two basic forms of motivated forgetting. One of them is suppression, which is a conscious form of forgetting. You want to force yourself not to remember it. That is why we are calling it suppression. And the repression. This is an unconscious form of forgetting. In such cases, the information is not forgotten because it is still in the long-term memory, and it could be remembered if the protective mechanisms were overcome. So remember, motivated forgetting, it is you who wants to forget. You want to forget something, an experience you went through. You don't want to remember it because it causes you to remember bitter or to remember some unpleasant occurrences. And therefore, you just not want to remember it. So that is we call for motivated forgetting theory. And you can apply two mechanisms to motivate the forgetting. One of it is you can suppress, or you can, is what we call suppression, where you consciously, which is a conscious form of forgetting. And the other one is repression, which is an unconscious form of forgetting. In other words, suppression is where you force yourself to forget. But repression is you forget it unconsciously. It is not in your conscious. So in short, what we are saying about motivated forgetting theory, we forget certain experiences as a matter of choice. We choose to forget because their remembrance brings us unpleasant moments. The retrieval failure theory, this theory assumes that memories stored in long-term memory are never forgotten, but rather are momentarily inaccessible as a result of interference, emotional states, or lack of inadequate cues. There's a slide I skipped earlier on, which was the retrieval process, because I had explained it. So retrieval failure theory explains that sometimes we fail to access information because we don't have the cues that can lead us to access that information. Just like I told you in a computer, sometimes if you don't get the certain word, you can't remember where you saved it. You just type it and search. And the computer goes through producing so many cues to see where that information is. Sometimes for us to be able to retrieve, we may require the setting in which we learned to be able to recall. Like for example, if you remember where you were seated, when we were learning about memory and learning, if I ask you about the curve of forgetting, you remember where you are now, that can now make you remember what I said about curve of forgetting, how it operates, or any of these theories. So when you now recall back where you were when you learned that, now it can give you a cue to remember, trace now that particular information. For example, learners may recall better if they are tested in the room they were taught. I don't know how practical that one is, but you can test it. We may fail to recall something at a particular moment, but when conditions are different, the information comes back more or less automatically. So retrieval failure theory is about that. Any information in the long-term memory is never forgotten, rather momentarily inaccessible. But for sure that information is there, you only need to have the proper cues and the memories will be traced and you'll be able to remember. So you can test this. We may fail to recall something at a particular moment, but when conditions are different, the information comes back more or less automatically. And then the upper one says learners may recall better if they are tested in the room where they were told the same particular material or content. How true that one is, you can test it. And therefore, we are saying forgetting is temporary rather than permanent phenomenon, according to the retrieval failure theory. It is like being unable to find something but not losing it. This type of forgetting can be explained best by what is known as tip of the tongue experience. That is an understanding that you know something but you cannot get to it. You know something, but you cannot get to it. So the last bit of this topic is the exceptional memories. Please stop signing out. We are just completing this topic. We are not coming back to it. Here we are saying exceptional memories. Some people are able to remember things so clearly that they are said to have what we call photographic memory. I don't know whether you have heard about photographic memories. I had a colleague who used to tell us they had their own colleague elsewhere. Somebody could remember, so long as you have read through a textbook or a chapter, you only need the first word in that chapter, and you can connect everything in that chapter, word by word. That is what we call photographic mind. It's like the whole picture of that textbook or that topic was taken a photograph and put in your memory. These are what we call exceptional memories. And some people have such photographic memories. You only need one cue. So like this colleague was explaining to us, that student colleague of his only needed to remember the first word in a particular topic. And everything about that book is mapped in their brain. They only need, they can see it as you look at a picture, a copy of a picture. They can see all that in their brain. So such a person, we can say, has a photographic mind, memory, sorry, a photographic memory. The technical term for this ability is called eidetic memory, and this ability is rare and is normally inborn. You cannot get it. It is like when we talk of a talent is inborn. Remember, we talk about aptitude abilities. Aptitude abilities are inborn abilities, where you don't even need to have gone to school to be able to do something. So we are saying these exceptional memories, the people who possess them, is normally an inborn affair, is an aptitude ability. Instead of using a selection process that concentrates on the most important aspects of incoming information, such people with the exceptional memories stores all the information. All the information. A good example is what I have given you. So this brings us to the end of our topic on memory and learning. What we are not touching now is the educational implications. The educational implications, I'll just mention them briefly when we meet next, but I will upload the notes for you in the elements, and I want you to read through the educational implications of memory and learning. And some of the educational implications of memory and learning, we have already seen them. Revision is a must. Rehearsing is a must. Practicing is a must. And we have seen them in other theories of learning. Rehearsal, practicing, reading and rereading. All those are necessary if memories are to be kept alive. If you want to remember the educational implications, even before we learn them, go back to the curve of forgetting. We have seen if you keep on revising minute after minute after minute, you have seen the level of the curve will be very high. But if you don't revisit the material after you have learned it, you have seen how the curve goes down until it is almost touching the zero level. So it is very important to revise. It is very important to keep on revisiting learned material so that you don't forget it fully. So with that, I want to wish you a good day and a great week ahead. Because we are only on Tuesday, the week is still young. So may I wish you, Kariuki, you have a question. What are the two examples of exceptional learners? Are you saying, what are the two examples of exceptional learners? These are not exceptional learners, they are exceptional memories, Kariuki, Mercy. These are exceptional memories. Kariuki Mercy, you are saying, I encountered this question somewhere. You see, soon we are going to do about exceptional learners. I don't think you are talking about exceptional learners. That is a topic on its own. We are yet to do it, Kariuki Mercy. So when we do about exceptional learners, you'll be able to get it. But what we are talking about here is exceptional memories. So Mercy, we shall do that topic on exceptional learners. Right now we are dealing with exceptional memories. So I believe once we'll have done that topic on exceptional learners, you'll be able to answer that question. Thank you, Edwin Kariuki. You are saying the lecture is wonderful. Ruth, we will still do this topic. We will still do this topic. And that topic will be talking of talented learners or exceptional learners, not exceptional memories. So we will compare the two. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I really feel good when you also feel that you have benefited for attending the lecture. So have a good day and a blessed week ahead. And I wish you everything good in your studies in the course of the week. Till we meet again, may God protect you and protect us all. Thank you, Tito. Thank you, Sylvia. Yes, Edwin Kariuki, you are telling me bye. Yeah, we'll meet again. Why same place? Where will you be? Thank you, everybody. Aaron, thank you, Davis. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everybody. So let me release you to go to your next class. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Koki. Thank you, Wajiko. Kariuki Mercy. Thank you. Siku njema pia. Doreen, you're asking about the takeaway card. I'm compiling it. Soon you will get it through your class representative. I'll pass it over to Sylvia. I'm just working on it, Doreen. Silas. Hata me sikuwa, I had not also taken my tea. I will also take my tea. So enjoy your tea also. We, Heron Kipkoech. Niko mbali sana Kipkoech.